So, a sudden change at the very top of Nigeria's policing architecture, amid questions that go far beyond a routine handover. The Inspector General of Police, Egbetokun, has reportedly been ordered to step down by President Tinubu, despite a controversial legal amendment that allowed him to remain in office until 2027. His tenure, extended by law but contested in the court of public opinion, is now ending not by statute but by executive decision, reportedly. Stepping in is Tunji Disu, a career officer with a reputation for operational policing and rapid response enforcement. But this transition raises deeper questions. If the law guaranteed tenure, what changed? Was this about performance, public pressure, internal security concerns, or politics? And does replacing one police chief with another signal reform or simply a reset? Of course, beyond the personalities, the real issue remains. A police force battling accusations of human rights abuses, declining public trust, and a worsening security landscape. So, is this the beginning of meaningful police reform, or just another change at the top of a system that resists change? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by Olumayowa, Research and Strategy Development Officer for the CLEAN Foundation, which used to be known as the Center for Law Enforcement and Education, and by the Professor of Law and Director of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, Dr. Sam Amadi. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me come to you first, Professor Amadi. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Let's start with the circumstances of the resignation. The former IGP Egbetokun had a legally backed tenure until 2027. Why is he stepping down now?
Well, first, the politics of whether he was asked to step down or voluntarily. So, two ways. By statute, he's guaranteed a tenure. The idea has been that the reason we have tenure is that political appointees are kind of controlled. They don't have to ask to leave, except they go through a process, which oftentimes may require address to the Senate and then the vote. But what has happened in this case may be that he's asked to go. And understanding that any executive president who wants you to go, you will go. I mean, starting from Jonathan with the CBN governor, look at the US, the notion of executive agencies, including the police, and the president's power to hire and fire. Many think that the president should be able to ask any public official with or without tenure to leave. So ultimately, it's a political game. He has to leave. He has a right to stay 4 years, but that right, if he decides to step down because of that pressure, nothing wrong. Oftentimes, if he's fired and he goes to court, experience shows us that the court may lean towards using interpretative acts in which they use and say, he who appoints can remove. So oftentimes the court, play dead brain and, side with the president, defer to the president.
So basically it's signed, sealed and delivered.
Looks like.
Yeah. Let me come to you, Mr. Olumayowa. Thank you very much for joining us. Is it your sense that this was voluntary or effectively a dismissal?
The report that is out there is what we can speak to. What we have there is that the president asked for his resignation. So he tendered his resignation and it was accepted by the president. So we wouldn't be able to say more on that, whether it's to his capability while he was in office or to what some would perceive in some quarters as some of his failures while he was there as the Inspector General of Police. We wouldn't be able to tell much about that, considering the fact that these are issues that is best sorted out at the executive level, just like what the Prof just mentioned. He was hired by the president, and the president can determine when he leaves the office. What we have seen so far, whether we have a law backing or supporting him for 4 years or not, is that he serves at the pleasure of the president. So I think that is what just played out from the entire conversation on the former IGP. It's interesting to start to discuss him as former IGP, because until very early this morning, we still refer to him as the Inspector General of Police, And of course, there was a case yesterday in court, and there was an injunction from court yesterday, and, the conversation around that, everybody was still referring to him as the IGP, but it serves at the pleasure of the president, and
Right.
the president feels is enough for him to go on.
Well, let's drill down further into this, Prof. Does it suggest a recalibration of power within the security architecture under President Tinubu?
I think President Tinubu is making some changes that suggest two things. One, maybe he wants to kind of increase the performance, operational performance of the security and paramilitary institutions around him. Again, the kind of executive presidents we have is that oftentimes hiring decisions are made on the basis of maybe loyalty, maybe projections of the next election. And so it's just like a football team and they about getting to a penalty and they begin to see coaches substitute, tactical substitution to get guys probably who will deliver. So in a sense, it could be operational. And again, the insecurity, the level of criminality, and of course the now former IG, who presume, had a lot of controversies. What happens with presidency is that when you are a burden and the value addition is not that much, whether politically or in terms of the performance of the government, you're likely going to be thrown away sooner or later. And so presidents retain the capacity to reimagine their administration, and in doing that, those who don't have strong political maybe anchor, and who are not operationally very useful, get cut off. So I see it as, just like we saw with the military, the chief of defense, the defense minister, politics was there, operational issues were there, and the president makes decision based on these two calculus. So for me, I think it's both. I think he got saddled with so many controversies and operationally not that fantastic, not probably damaging more, but he didn't provide much value. He was becoming a albatross on his neck, and the president needed to throw off this weight. And Disu, who is now, reputed to be the successor, is a person who has better public relations, and maybe.
Well, I'm going to come to that in a minute, but just to drill down further on what you're saying, which is actually quite interesting, because I mean, you have this capacity for insight and hindsight and foresight, which we always find very interesting.
Thank you.
What is your gut instinct, though?
My gut instinct that the president has endured him enough and is not being valuable. And presidents could be very, very heartless, especially in time of crisis and in time of going to election. So they basically get the courage to throw away those who constitute some degree of problem. I think he's at the end of the day, I think the insiders decide that, look, again, there was a crisis brewing around personnel, corruption, relationship with some criminal or alleged criminal. So this is basically the president recalibrating perception, number one, which is critical in election time. He had taken so many actions that suggest that he wants to be looked upon as a different kind of president, who is, some of his weak areas has been issues around corruption, character of governance, open governance. He is trying to re-engineer that image, and he helps operationally in terms of delivery of service as well as political optics. So for me, this is really either that is a crisis of confidence, or this is an opportunity to replace somebody whose profile perhaps constitutes a problem to the president.
Right, and Mr. Olumayowa, you are of course from the CLEAN Foundation, which used to be known as the Center for Law Enforcement Education. So educate us. I mean, realistically, can a change in IGP alone address Nigeria's deep-rooted challenges within the police force, or are we once again mistaking leadership change for structural reform?
I think I'll go with the second option. We are taking leadership change for structural reform that is actually needed. Changing in the space of like 10 years, a decade, we've had quite a number of IGPs that have gone. We've had some of them serve for 3 years, some serve for 2 years. I think Egbetokun seems to be the longest serving in the decade. So what we've seen so far is that a change at that very highest level of the police doesn't translate automatically to reform. Reform goes beyond the police itself, and I think that's something that all of us must realize. It goes beyond the police. It actually requires a higher level of executive interest and will to push for police reform. There's plethora of literature that argues that the people in power would want to keep the police in a particular shape for their use, so if there's going to be a real change, a real reform to police as we have it right now, it will come from the executive, it will come from the president, not by just changing whoever is the leader of, or whoever is the Inspector General of Police. It's beyond the office. It's beyond the personality. And again, one of the arguments that a lot of us we've put on the table so many times is that when you ask a person to serve as the Inspector General of Police and he has just 2 years to serve, what reform are you actually expecting him to bring? In the first 6 months, he's traveling around trying to understand how the office works. 1 year will come. Maybe he starts to think of, how do I please the president? How do I please this person or the National Assembly? Before you know what is going on, the removal is there, the letter for his resignation or retirement, whichever is already on his table. So again, we'll see that doesn't translate to reform.
So how do you think they can get around that then?
Again, some had, one of the arguments again during this extension of office was that the intent was for us to have an Inspector General of Police who can sit in office for a while and see whatever reform project or idea that he has to run its course. Maybe for 3 years, maybe for 4 years. The president decided to go for the 4 years. What was the intent was that if he brings a reform idea, he can sit with it and build it such that whoever comes afterwards can build on what was built already. If that happened, that's another conversation.
Right.
But what we've seen so far is that it doesn't, when you put a person in a particular office that has that number of issues to deal with, you've mentioned corruption, what a lot of us don't realize is that the police challenge is both internal and external. Within the system itself, there's a problem. Outside, there's a way the public perceive the police. So someone who is going to sit in our office will actually need some time to build that kind of change.
Right.
So it's not the person.
Okay.
It must come from the executive.
Do you think, Professor Amadi, that we should be, that the president or whatever should be looking for someone who is already a reform kind of oriented person with a vision and a plan, rather than just putting anybody in there, or perhaps bring his own vision and plan and give to them and say, I need an implementer, go and implement this?
Maybe all of them together. First, there is a statutory constraint. People forget that the Police Act provides for how you appoint an IG, and it must have to be AIG, who is minimum, who is a very top. My professor have been to hire from anywhere. Look, in South Africa, after apartheid, they hired the first police chief was from the beer company. Managerial competence. If you look at the US, for example, the great job done in New York by the police chief was a retired police chief from Boston. And they recruited him to come. So the police problem is not, for me, I don't like a police chief who is part of a structure to disrupt. Again, we shouldn't forget that the police has a DNA problem. It was conceived in West Africa as part of colonial force to repress the people. When we did the work with Claim Foundation, the idea was to retool policing, looking at 3 indicators. First is accountability. And the idea is the police don't like the idea that they are a civilian force. So we talked about police services. They didn't like the idea. Sierra Leone today, after their crisis, now as police services. So there must be a both symbolic and structural sense in which you reinvent the police. Now, what you can say for personnel change is that oftentimes, assuming the president has the vision for change, a personnel change can align that moment, because a moment of change, and the new person who comes in could have the momentum to enjoy the moment and create an impact. So this has been acclaimed to be, a good operational guy, but the reform should be deep. And that sense is first to reconceive what is the police in 20th century democratic state, different from the police in colonial era. Indeed. So there's been a continuity of that dysfunctionality. The idea that the police is a regime protector, not a law enforcement as a service. If you don't recreate that sense of purpose, ideation, what is police for, then you look at the institutional structure. Does it enable this level of accountability and responsibility? Just take one example. If a police brutalizes a civilian, they go into police or the room trial. But we have argued that it should be an open trial where the victims themselves are part of it and prosecuting that process. So it creates a sense of dependence that, look, the police is actually a civilian force subject to civilian oversight. They didn't like the idea. So there need to be structural change. In fact, the issue around state police may not even be necessary. If you change the police operationally again, why should the IG command, control policing at the local level? Even without the state police, the police should be operationally decentralized in a way that the police officers at different levels have functional powers to operate as chiefs, not necessarily linking everybody to the IG, who is politically controlled by the president, not just in terms of direction and policy and appointment, but also even in terms of mundane policing function. So this moment could crystallize a new awakening, but it's not deep enough. The disruption is not deep enough to create a teachable moment and a new awakening to the fact that, look, we're going to go in a new direction. So maybe some of the avoidable mistakes of operation, some of the human rights violations of the past, this could clean up the image, make the police more friendly. But the real crisis are deeper than a personnel change.
Well, that's a very interesting analysis. And let me come to you as we fast run out of time. Yeah. We've just been talking about the new acting IGP. What qualifies Tunji Disu as the right choice at this moment? And is he likely to do things differently? In other words, is this simply a change of faces, or is there a clearly defined, I mean, I don't know whether you know that, but is it your sense that there is a defined reform agenda?
I think every IGP has its own CV, if you like. So if you look at what he has done in the past, where he has served, you can start to give him some credit. So for instance, he has both operational and administrative capability. He has served as the commander for the RRS in Lagos. He has served as Commissioner of Police in Rivers State. He also served as Commissioner of Police here in FCT. In fact, when this Inspector General of Police was appointed, I think he was the first PSO to the IGP. So he has those experiences. One would expect that this can come to bear in the way he's going to handle the task on his table. We know that it's very enormous, but his past experiences should come to play at this point. All of the issues that we've always raised about police reform, they are still there. None of them has been completely sorted. Accountability is still one of the issues, like what Prof was saying about openness, transparency when it comes to the way cases are handled of right abuse by police officers. Of course, they have so many mechanisms, but one would expect right now is that these mechanisms needs to be enhanced better than whatever they've been doing in the past, because we know that there's a lot of issues of human rights abuse being perpetrated by police officers. Right. So from my own perspective, personally speaking, I would say he has the experience, but it's one thing to have experience. It's another thing to get to the office and let those experiences influence what you do. Indeed. Yeah, so I think that is where the work is, that beyond just having these on his CVs, all of the efforts, all of his laudable achievements, it's time for him to bring it to the place where it really counts, not just for the NPF as an institution, but that it counts for Nigerians.
Okay. On that note, I want to thank you both very much indeed. Olaniyi Olumayowa is Research and Strategy Development Officer for the Clean Foundation, which used to be known as the Center for Law Enforcement Education, and of course the lawyer, Professor of Law, Director of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, Dr. Sam Amadi. Thank you very much indeed.